to whom it may concern. This animal rights activist slash vegan musician slash entrepreneur is going to be using his platform in the future to discuss the topic of aliens. Yes, that's right. Extraterrestrials, unidentified flying objects, life elsewhere in the universe that a growing consensus among scientists at NASA, the US military, and Harvard University have concluded are currently visiting our planet. And the reason I'm going to be making time to talk about this isn't just because it's the biggest fucking news in human history. It's because this issue has everything to do with animal rights and the climate emergency. Here's why. Spoiler alert. These beings, whoever they are definitely not vegan. While we don't actually know if we're dealing with biological or technological entities yet, that is, fellow animals like us, artificial intelligence, or some sort of hybrid, one thing we do know is when it comes to their respect for sentient life, well, let's just say we've got good news and bad news. Now, before we jump in here, I just want to give a word of caution that a lot of people are going to be justifiably and rationally afraid of what you're about to learn if you're hearing about this for the first time. Because we're not just talking about a civilization that, by virtue of the fact that they can reach Earth from wherever they came from, we know possesses science and technology that gives them godlike powers over humanity. And this is an atheist saying this. By virtue of their level of technological and scientific advancement, this civilization, whoever they are, has godlike powers over Earthlings. But we're also going to be talking about very strong evidence that both abductions of human beings as well as mutilations, lethal mutilations of animals are occurring. But I realized after making this video that I didn't really talk about the positive side of known interactions and potential communications between humans and this other species. Chief of which is the fact that nuclear weapons were deactivated on numerous instances by UFOs.
Declassified U.S. government documents and witness testimony from former or retired U.S. military personnel confirm beyond any doubt the reality of ongoing UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites.
What you have heard here today is evidence of a phenomenon. It sounds fantastic, and it is fantastic. In 1967, I was a missile launch officer stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana.
Malmstrom was America's first line of nuclear defense. Its silos packed with Minutemen missiles, each one nearly 100 times more powerful than the bomb that devastated Hiroshima. Launch officers could, within minutes of confirmation, send their birds arcing 6,000 miles to incinerate key Soviet cities, triggering a war that would end our civilization. Lieutenant Salas was stationed in his underground launch control capsule when he received a frantic call from one of his topside guards.
Screaming into the phone saying they're looking a red glowing object hovering just above our front gate. Our missiles began going into what's called a no-go condition or unlaunchable. Essentially, they were disabled.
Channel 11. In fact, 10 missiles began going offline in a matter of seconds, one after the other.
I was on duty at Echo, which is our squadron command post. We had strike teams respond to alarms from the missiles. They were 3 to 5 miles away. And they said, sir, lack of a better description, there's a flying saucer hovering over that missile, and there's a beam of reddish light going down to it. It had to be a data collection thing. I'm sure they scanned the warhead or something.
In 1980, I was reassigned from the Pentagon to RAF Bentwaters as a deputy base commander. At that time, Bentwaters was one of the largest tactical fighter wings in the world.
It was also the largest American nuclear bomb storage depot in Europe.
In December 1980, early in the morning, several of our security policemen discovered strange lights in the forest. I took several security policemen with me. I also had my small cassette recorder I carried everywhere when I was on duty.
What is it? We don't know, sir. Yeah, it's a strange, small red light. And all the barnyard animals have gotten quiet now. Deathly calm. This is weird.
The deactivation of nuclear weapons by UFOs, or the fact that US senators learned about this, is the reason that the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program was created, which is the most recent manifestation of the US military's investigation into these objects. The conclusion of that scientific investigation, according to the director of that program, who very publicly resigned and made the front page of the New York Times when I was living in New York, and absolutely rocked my world and sparked my interest in this subject, was that, and I quote,
through the observation, scientific methodologies that were applied to look at this phenomena, that these aircraft, we'll call them aircraft, are displaying characteristics that are not currently within the U.S. inventory, nor in any foreign inventory that we are aware of.
So I know you're being clear, but I mean, the answer is yes.
I can't speak on behalf of the government. Obviously, I'm not in the U.S. government anymore. My personal belief is that there is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone, whatever that means.
Now, to the over 100 nuclear weapons launch officers who have come forward publicly so far to speak about this subject, there is near universal agreement that there was a message in the deactivation of those nuclear missiles. The message being,
To me, it's pretty clear. This is just, we're shining a light on this, we're pointing it out. What are you people doing with nuclear weapons?
and we know through U.S. intelligence services that similar instances happened in the Soviet Union as well.
Even more alarming incidents took place on both sides of the Cold War. According to once secret Soviet documents, a UFO hovered over a Ukrainian nuclear base for nearly an hour. Inexplicably, several missiles suddenly switched to full combat readiness and began a launch sequence without any authentication codes. After 15 heart-stopping seconds, the countdown to a potential Armageddon ceased as abruptly as it had started.
Now, no American president or former Soviet dictator has come forward so far to speak about how they interpreted that message, although we can be absolutely certain that occurrences like this will be reported up the chain of command and will be known to the president, and we'll never know if this had an impact on the thinking of the world leaders during the Cold War. If this maybe had some impact on the fact that there wasn't a nuclear war between the United States and the USSR. What we do know is that there wasn't a nuclear war. How would history have unfolded differently? Who knows? But this is what happened. And I would say that's a pretty positive interaction, communication, whatever you want to call it, between this civilization and ours. So the takeaway here for anyone who's confused about what seem like very cruel interactions and very benevolent interactions is to think about the human race. We are a large and very complex species, and we have a lot of diversity among us. We have angels and demons among us, so to speak. Again, I'm an atheist. I'm using that as a figure of speech. We have people who perform acts of completely unnecessary and unprovoked cruelty towards animals, towards children. And we have people who dedicate their entire lives to rescuing animals and to rescuing children. And we're the same species. Now think about a species that's more advanced than us, that's more complex than us. They may very well have a range of interactions. Furthermore, we don't even know if we're dealing with one civilization, with one species here, or with multiple civilizations. There's such a wide diversity in the types of unidentified flying objects that are filmed, that are recorded by civilians and by the military, that it is quite possible we might be dealing with multiple species. Just don't rush to any judgments. Just follow the scientific method, base your opinion on the data, and I'm going to be very honest with you this entire time about what we know, what's a scientific fact, what we may or may not know, and what remains unknown about what is certainly the greatest mystery, I guess we can't say on Earth, the greatest mystery in our part of the Milky Way. The good news is that, well, look around you. We're still here. Obviously, a civilization that has the technological ability to traverse interstellar space also has the power to exterminate us and destroy our entire planet if they felt like it. For context, humanity had stockpiled enough nuclear weapons by the 1960s when a supercomputer weaker than your phone took up an entire room to completely wipe out life on Earth. And yet even today, in the age of androids, self-driving cars, and vacuum cleaners that are smarter than your buddy from high school who got an F in biology but still thinks he knows more about medical science than actual doctors and medical scientists, even today, we're still centuries, if not millennia away from being able to replicate the kind of technological advancement being demonstrated by these UFOs. Or as the military has been calling them to avoid the idiotic stigma associated with that term, UAP, or Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. It's just a synonym. So the good news is they don't appear to be genocidal, imperialistic, a conquering civilization. Whew. This is real life. This is not Independence Day. Thank dog. And this makes some sense because the Earth has no important or unique resources worthy of being conquered. Water is ubiquitous throughout the universe. There's more of it on Jupiter's moon of Europa than there is on Earth. And this planet is made out of the same basic elements that the rest of the universe is made out of. All of which, except for helium and hydrogen, are created when stars collapse into supernovas. The same physics are at play in all solar systems in our universe. Although there may be other universes, we may live in a multiverse, but you'll have to ask Albert Einstein about that. That's above my pay grade. The only thing unique about the Earth is life. Earthly life, specifically. And that's where the bad news comes in. Despite reading every reputable book I could find on the topic, I'll be the first to admit that no one, including the experts, has any idea why these beings are doing what they're doing. But using the scientific method, based on observation, it looks like we, and not just humans, but Earthlings of all species, are being studied with the same kind of dispassionate and sometimes deadly cold curiosity that British biologists used to study life in Australia when they first discovered that continent. Although to clarify, nobody is saying that this other civilization just discovered Earth. Yesterday, or in 2004, when the famous encounter between UAPs and the USS Nimitz aircraft carrier Battlegroup occurred. We have radar evidence of UFOs maneuvering in ways that are still impossible for the state-of-the-art human aircraft and drones dating as far back as the 1940s, photographic evidence of the same objects dating back to the 1930s, written records cataloged by otherwise accurate and reputable historians in the ancient Roman Empire and ancient Egyptian Empire, and oral histories and cave paintings from indigenous peoples around the world dating back many thousands of years on all continents. So take a deep breath. This is not Independence Day. Although the reality of this topic is nothing like any science fiction story I've ever read, real life, once again, is much stranger than fiction.
Now, as far as the topic of animal mutilations, I'm not going to get deep into that here because first I want to introduce you to the peer-reviewed scientific evidence confirming that some sort of alien life is visiting the Earth in the first place. So be sure to subscribe if you're interested in what's going on beyond this tiny speck of dust in the universe.
I'm also going to introduce you to some of the best books and documentaries that have been made on the topic, some of which I'm going to list in the video details below if you can't wait to learn more about such a fascinating topic. But as far as animal mutilations, to give you a preview, these mutilations are suspected of being connected to UFO UAP activity because A, they often occur in direct conjunction with UAP sightings, some of which are caught on film, and B, they sometimes leave residual radiation and anomalous beams of electromagnetic radiation, and residual radiation have been recorded repeatedly by numerous world militaries and civilian scientists in conjunction with UAP activity. And C, these mutilations are carried out with surgical, laser-level precision of the sort that would only be possible for humans to do with extremely expensive lasers in an ultra-controlled laboratory setting. And yet these mutilations happen in the middle of nowhere, on ranches, and have no accompanying tire tracks, footprints, human or animal footprints, or animal bite marks, or forensic evidence of any sort that both FBI experts and civilian scientists and veterinarians could find. And most bizarrely, often not a single drop of blood left behind either inside or outside of the animal on the surrounding area, albeit while multiple organs have been removed from the inside of the animal, again with surgical laser-like precision. The only clue as to what has caused these bizarre deaths are the UAPs that have been witnessed and sometimes filmed in the area. So with over 10,000 known cases that the FBI has recorded in just the United States, you may be asking yourself, why would the US government's leading law enforcement agency investigate this? We mass murder cows every second of every day. Vegans, aka real animal lovers, care about cows. Why does the FBI care about cows? They don't investigate slaughterhouses. So just remember,
While the law does not respect animal rights, our laws do respect money and property crimes, and cattle and horses in particular are worth a lot of money. Demand for answers was so strong at one point in the 1970s, although these mutilations are still occurring in the present day, that at one point it went all the way up to the US Senate. And after thoroughly investigating any potential human satanic cults that could be behind this, and all of the forensic evidence available, the FBI has precisely 0 human suspects, not even a single lead. And precisely no idea how humans could even remove the internal organs of a 2,000-pound animal in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere, without creating a single drop of blood, tire track, or even footprint. Now, to anyone who's disturbed by the idea of 10,000 innocent horses, cows, and other species being mutilated and killed over the last few decades, here's some food for thought. The human race kills 10,000 cows, horses, and other animals every 3.5 seconds. 1, 2, 3.5, and our slaughterhouses have just killed that many animals. So here's the first connection to animal rights. If you have sympathy for those animals, and you still eat animals, it's time to take a long, honest look in the mirror. You can't, and no one can control the actions of unidentified flying objects. They're centuries to millennia more advanced than an F-35 fighter jet or even a nuclear weapon that we might very unwisely use to try and shoot them down. But you can control your own actions. And while we're talking about peer-reviewed scientific evidence, now that we know that not only can you survive without eating animals, but that you can live a considerably longer, healthier, and very delicious, and even a more sexually active life without eating animals, and that the very survival of life on Earth depends on it. While they may be performing sometimes lethal experiments on Earthlings, aliens are not here to destroy Earth. We are doing that. And the single biggest thing you could do to reduce your personal impact on the climate emergency and the mass extinction that is in progress as we speak is to leave the cows alone and stuff your face with delicious vegan burgers instead. The other reason I think it's extremely important for me to start discussing this topic that fascinates me so much on my channel is more personal. Now, when I make a video directly related to veganism and it goes viral, the majority of the people I reach are already vegan. Now, when I make a video about UFOs, politics, music, military history, or anything else that interests me other than veganism, I reach an audience that's interested in those topics, the majority of whom still eat animals. Those are the people the animals need me to build bridges with. If they stumble upon my channel because they too are fascinated by the fact that an alien fucking civilization is clearly visiting our planet, then those people are actually going to be discovering a vegan message by accident as they creep through my other videos made by someone who they can at least relate to about the most fascinating and under-discussed topic on Earth. The other reason that I think it is of life and death importance for us to acknowledge the reality that we are not alone has to do with our sense of who we are, our sense of identity, whether that's by tribal, nationalistic, ethnic, religious barriers, or whether we're identifying as human beings, as animals, as Earthlings. Let me tell you a quick story to illustrate that point. When the first Apollo mission went to the moon, which wasn't Apollo 11, that was the first time we landed on the moon. Before that, I don't know if it was Apollo 9 or 10. But we sent a spacecraft to the moon, which orbited around and came back. NASA wanted to just double check they could do that before they risked actually sending astronauts to land on the moon. As that spacecraft was flying away from Earth, it looked back and took the first picture in human history of our home, of our planet. And many historians consider that one of the key pivotal moments that led to the formation of the environmental movement, that led to international movements towards peace and against militarism. Because everybody on Earth up to that point had been told a story, had been shown a map of the Earth, divided up and color-coded into borders, into barriers, into the nations of the world. But when we saw the Earth for what it really was, this beautiful blue and green, fragile planet floating in the universe, it had a revolutionary impact. Not to say, obviously, people still identified nationalistically, there were still wars after that. But the environmental movement that we know of today was given a massive boost, and some say was formed in that key moment when we had this sense of collective identity. Obviously, not enough people have that identity yet, and that's the root cause of so many of the world's problems. Now we think about what will be the consequences of the majority of the human race acknowledging that aliens or some other being is here. I'm going to use the term aliens from now on because, to quote Professor J Allen Hynek, who was the scientific advisor to the Air Force's first 3 programs investigating UFOs, that was Project Sign, Project Grudge, and Project Blue Book in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. Professor J Allen Hynek was an astrophysicist who the military hired to consult on it. He came to the conclusion that while we can't say definitively whether these beings are extraterrestrial, whether they're extratemporal, that is from another time, or whether they're extra dimensional, that is somehow traversing dimensions or coming from higher dimensions. What we can say is they're not from this time and space. They're not from Earth in the 20th/21st century, and like I pointed out earlier, they've probably been coming here for centuries, if not millennia, before that. And I think it's fair in that sense, regardless of whether they're extraterrestrial, temporal, or dimensional, to call them aliens. The US government calls immigrants aliens. The US government calls human beings who move from a different country to the United States aliens, legal or illegal aliens. That's insulting and absurd. I think it's fair to say if someone came from another dimension, from the future, or from another planet, that's an actual alien. And that's what we're talking about here. And if we look at the biggest threat of our time, the comet that's racing towards Earth in the form of the climate emergency and mass extinction. While vegan food, which is a key solution to the crisis, might be cheaper than animal-based products, and that's amazing, the world going vegan by itself is not going to solve these problems in and of itself. The majority of emissions aren't coming from animal agriculture, they're coming from the burning of fossil fuels. An enormous amount of emissions come from animal agriculture, but the majority are not. And if we're going to build the solar, wind, geothermal, the renewable energy in order to shut down every coal power plant in the world, every oil-fired power plant in the world in time, if we're going to switch every car, bus, train, ship, and airplane in the world to electric fuel sources in time to avoid catastrophe and the breakdown of our civilization and life on Earth as we know it, it's not going to be cheap. And while we could pay for some of that and should pay for some of that by increasing taxes on rich people and corporations, that's precisely what President Biden and the Democrats want to do in the United States, what all logical political parties want to do in other countries, and in fact are doing to some degree, it's not enough, clearly. We're in a crisis right now. The world's on fire right now. And in my opinion, and I think this is kind of obvious, the biggest waste of money that every government in the world is guilty of is military spending. We live in an era now when there's less international conflict than any era in the history of civilization. Read this fantastic book written by an incredible historian from Harvard University if you disagree with that point, but there's an enormous amount of evidence in this book. I highly recommend it. There is a lot of murder in the world, there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of civil conflict. All of that's horrible. But there's very little international conflict and war. Almost all of the military spending we're doing is a complete waste. You can argue that some of it needs to be spent to combat terrorism. I would agree with that. I'm not a total pacifist. I'm not saying we should disband the world's militaries. What I'm saying is we're spending trillions upon trillions of dollars on something we don't need, on building up tanks and airplanes and aircraft carriers and weapons to fight wars that can't even happen because of mutually assured destruction. The United States, Russia, and China all have nuclear weapons, so they can't fight each other. The United States and the Chinese economy is the same economy, so they can't fight each other in that sense without collapsing. So their enormous military budgets are a complete waste. Again, I'm not saying we should, or it's even realistic to call for the disbandment of the military. No, that's absurd. What I'm saying is we're spending way too much. We can cut military budgets by a comparatively small fraction and have enough money to shut down the entire toxic fuel industry very soon. Soon enough to avoid catastrophe. So acknowledging that aliens are here is not only going to change our identity as human beings, it's going to make a total mockery of the military as we know it because our most advanced weapons are a total joke to their civilization. I do think this will give a big push, a momentum towards demilitarization. And this is something we desperately need if we're going to solve the climate emergency. I talked about animal mutilations, but there's also a substantial amount of physical evidence that similar lethal mutilations have occurred in Homo sapiens, carrying all the same traits that I mentioned earlier, as well as a much larger body of physical evidence that supports accounts of abductions of humans. In the near future, I'm going to be interviewing the former director of the British Air Force's, or sorry, I should say Royal Air Force's UFO program on exactly that topic and why he concluded that abductions are a real phenomenon, based not only on his work at the UK Ministry of Defense, but also based on the results of a team of doctors and medical scientists in the United States who have actually performed surgeries and recovered groundbreaking physical evidence supporting accounts of alleged abductees. And just like breaking down nationalistic borders between human beings is important, realizing that we are no longer on top of the food chain on this planet is something that I think will have a profound impact in breaking down species barriers when we realize we're in the same boat, or quite literally in the same spaceship, as our fellow Earthlings in relation to our non-earthly visitors. I'm also going to be making a lot of videos to try and reach outside of the left-wing progressive echo chamber to at least try and find some common ground with right-wing people to take action against animal cruelty and mass murder, and to take action about the fact that our spaceship, Earth, is dying. Coming full circle, if you still think UFOs are a joke, just know that this is such an important topic that even now, in the midst of a global pandemic, a climate emergency, a murder and crime wave sweeping through the United States, not only is Congress making time and money to investigate UFOs, it's one of the only issues on Earth that Republicans and Democrats have any common ground on. So I hope that this is an issue that will help me connect with right-wing social media influencers and their audiences who might never otherwise be exposed to an animal rights perspective, who might never otherwise be exposed to a progressive political perspective that isn't manipulated and made into a caricature by Fox News. Spoiler alert, I have lived in both Canada and the United States, and I can say with full confidence that less gunfire and more healthcare paid for by higher taxes on rich people is a damn good thing. Although as an olive branch, let me reach out to people on the right and say that I agree that defunding the police in the midst of a mass murder wave is a damn idiotic idea. Not all Democrats agree with that. Even on the so-called far left, Bernie Sanders doesn't agree with that. I don't agree with that. There are much better ways to fund crime prevention programs, which needs to happen. We need to do things to prevent crime, to attack the root causes of crime, but that money needs to come from somewhere else, other than the people who are risking their lives and getting shot on a daily basis, apprehending murderers and rapists. I'm not so ideological that I think that everything the left does is the right thing to do and everything the right does is wrong. I disagree with almost everything the Republican Party stands for, but that's because of logic. That's because of the evidence. It's not because I agree with one team or another. I don't live in the United States anymore. I live here in Canada. So to wrap this up, if you're interested in the upcoming series of videos I'm going to be doing on the most fascinating topic in the universe, interviewing the scientists, the experts, hopefully some of the pilots as well, and the first-hand witnesses, then be sure you're tuned into this channel, my fellow Earthlings. And in case anyone not from around here is listening, welcome to Earth. We're not as crazy as we seem on the news, so please be nice to us. Live long and prosper. Vegan power.